I guess Nico here. Got an overwhelming response on this build so far from you guys. Thank you so much for following along. And if it's your first time here, go check out the series of the 50 kilowatt hour upgrade. It is start to finish Vivne product installation and review. I haven't got to the review yet because it's not fully installed. But anyway, on this episode, we are going to watch me install the battery, install the wiring harness that they provide for the BMS, all the modules that connect to the BMS. I have to reuse the original temp sensors. They give me a brand new BMS that's pre-programmed. Going to install that. I did make a mistake installing the BMS. I'm going to cover that in the video so you don't make that same mistake. So without further ado, let's get into the video and watch me install the Vivne battery modules. And it's not as hard as you think. It's actually, with the right tools, you can get it done fairly quickly. All right, here we go. Okay, probably the hardest part of the build is getting these heavy modules in place. This is module A, goes on the driver's side, front of the pack. Then we got module B, goes on the passenger side, front of the pack. And then you got C and D that go in the back of the pack, and they stack on top of each other. I suggest a two-man lift because these are quite heavy. Okay, when I set this in place, I noticed it just wasn't quite lining up right. There was like a gap. I couldn't figure it out, and pulled it back out. I looked, made sure nothing was preventing it from sitting down all the way. I put it back in. There's still a gap there. So what I did is I went back and looked at my supplies stuff, realized that there's a spacer they provide to make sure it take up that gap. So once I figured that out, I was able to put the spacer in and it bolted up beautifully. All right, let's continue watching. One thing I do want to mention that it is directionally orientated. If you put it in the wrong way, you got to flip it over so the bolt holes match. It goes in one specific way. You can see here, I'm noticing my problem. So I got to pull that module back out, flip this bar, put the module back in, and then everything was able to get bolted in. A little bit of a to-do, but we got her in there. All right, now I'm installing these spacers with the long bolts. So when you slap the last module on there, you're able to bolt it to the existing case without any problems. So here I am placing it down, putting the bolts in. We're all set. You can see, yes, you can install it by yourself. Do I recommend it? No, those are pretty heavy. I just went ahead and give it a try just to see if I could do it. And it was pretty tough, but modules are in. Now I'm going to take the time to get the nuts and bolts and get this thing secure, and then we'll move on. Okay, one thing to note, Vivne does state that they do not want you to use power tools when tightening these bolts. Now, I use my power tool to tighten these bolts, but I just use them to run them down. I did not put any torque on the heads. I just ran them down until they were almost snug by hand. And then I went back through with a ratchet and tightened them down with a ratchet and socket. I did not put any torque with that power tool. So again, make sure you follow the instructions. I just did that because I didn't want to spin a ratchet 300 turns. It was quicker to do it with a drill. And there were so many bolts, so many nuts. It's just a lot faster to do this with a drill. So again, the recommendations: do not put any torque with a power drill. You do what I did. Make sure that you don't put any power at the end of the bolt. All right, I realized it wasn't recording, but all it is, I went around, tightened everything up. Not sure what's going on, but I just did not record that. Just talking about how well these connectors were taped up. They had electrical tape around them very well, but I've already connected the wiring harness for the cable that's going to go to the BMS. So let me go ahead and get the rest of this connected, and we're going to get our safety switch back on, and I'm going to get all my bus bars back on here, get all this stuff back the way it was, and yeah, so far so good. All right, here I'm just putting the remaining bolts on the back stack to bolt these down to the case, and then we're going to move on and start wiring this thing up. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and replace this device. Don't know what it does, but sure it's something important. Yeah, and I'm not going to strip these shrink wrap tubing off until I'm ready to start making connections. I don't know if they supplied another one of these. Let me see if they supplied another one of these. If they did, I'm going to use the new one. And they did. Service plug to D negative. Right there, service plug to D negative. I wasn't happy about the dirt that came off of that. But anyway, I'm just replacing plugs now and getting everything plugged in, bolted down. And it's all pretty straightforward. Now, this bracket here was not fitting correctly. I actually had to bend it a little bit to get it to fit and get the sensors on there, but I ended up making it work. It was a little bit of a to-do, but we got her in there. Now, before anybody jumps in here about not wearing high voltage gloves, if you notice, all of the terminals on the modules do have shrink wrap on them, so it is fully protected. Okay, here's where I messed up. You see this connector here? It's a 16-pin connector. I thought it plugged in here. This is where actually the temp sensor plugs in. Now there's another connector down here which ties C and D modules together. I was supposed to plug those two together, and I plugged it into the BMS and I thought I ruined it. Ended up not being ruined. I got lucky, so don't make that mistake. Okay, so you got to reuse your old temp sensors. I'm going to pull them off the brackets. And we got bracket for temp sensor. So a couple of these brackets actually fell off when I was trying to install this. They were spot welded onto the housing. I'm not going to weld it because I'm not welding them when there's battery modules in there. So yeah, we had to figure out something here. See how that was welded? A little right off. All right, I got some extreme heavy duty double-sided tape. We're going to use this to reattach the temp sensor. And it's inside the pack. I don't see this. It's not going to have any type of force on it. Okay, so after I got the temp sensor wires in, I turned my attention to the BMS. So I started going over here. Notice I had the brackets on the wrong side. Switched those over, got the BMS wired, installed, and then I'm going to start moving on to the rest of the installation and the wiring. Okay, I'm going to wire in the safety switch, and then we're going to move on and start wiring up these modules. Okay, all of these cables are provided, and they are labeled very nice, tell you where to connect them to. And you just want to make sure you got them nice and secure. They do provide the shrink wrap tubing, so you want to make sure that you get it shrink wrapped. That way there is no chance of anything getting grounded or isolation faults or anything like that. So, all right, so let's watch the rest of this install. What'd you think? I'm going to show you the pack fully installed and get into some close-ups and see how the wiring and everything's done. So I did this 3D model of my exact pack, took some pictures of it, put it together into 3D rendering so you can see how this thing's put together. So let's take a look at this and you can see how well this thing sits in the case. Plenty of clearance, plenty of room for it to breathe. It's not really too tight up against here. You got space between the modules. So I think temperature wise, this is going to be good. And you can even see here, even along the sides, there's going to be plenty of gap between the housing and the module itself. If you look here where the housing sits, the inside of the module is actually going to have plenty of breathing room. Like right here is a good place to see. Look at that gap. Plenty of breathing room. So that will allow heat to dissipate much better than the 62 kilowatt hour, which basically doesn't have very much free space at all. So this 50 kilowatt hour in a 24 kilowatt hour case, I think is a way to go. I really like it. It was very easy to install. So anyway, let's get into the wiring. All this stuff from the plugs, back, bus bar, this is all going to have to stay original. Vivne starts from here, here, and here. And you're going to have to keep the same temp sensor. So be careful when you're taking apart the old modules, not to damage those temp sensors or the cabling, because then you're going to have to get new ones, which again adds cost to the job. You don't want to do that. Speaking of temp sensors, we have the back of the pack. I hate it when the mouse thing clicks and stays, but the back of the pack, you have temp sensor here. Oops. I'm going to spin it, not rotate it. Let's go here. You have a temp sensor here and spin around. There's a temp sensor here. So there are your three locations of the temp sensor. Let's spin it around. Your BMS sits on the driver's side in the back of the pack. They provide the brackets and everything on how to install it. And, all your cabling, all of your shrink wrap tubings, all included. So they pretty much give you everything. Even the seal to seal the case is included. Now, all I had left to do, and again, I've already installed this in the car. The car's been running for 2 to 3 weeks now. I've had a delay trying to get this edited because I've been working 80 plus hours a week on my normal job. That is tapering off to an end. I had to rush home. I had 30 hours from the time I got in town by the time I had to leave town again to install the battery pack. I did not record the installation of the pack. It's pretty simple. When you install the pack, literally, you lift it up into the car. You try to get this there. You just connect these three connectors, bolt everything up. That's it. Then you put your service plug back in, connect the battery. You're done. It's really that simple. Just the reverse of me taking out. You guys have all seen the video of me taking out. If you haven't, go back, check it out. It's basically the reverse of that. It's really, really easy. This is probably the easiest battery on any EV to take out because of the lack of thermal management. So there's no refrigerant lines running through there. There's nothing to heat. I mean, it's simple. It's just a battery pack. So anyway, that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I will give you updates on how the car performs. I'm going to do a range test, so there'll be more to come. So if you don't mind, click that notification bell and the subscribe button, and look forward to seeing you guys soon. All right, take care and God bless.